In that same report, the new Green Learning Agenda, you explain at least what some of the basics an education system should have. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What are these basics?
Sure. So I think it's first important to recognize that a new Green Learning Agenda is proposing an alternative way of thinking about education in a time of climate crisis to help achieve unfettered economic growth. And so a new Green Learning Agenda is aimed to transform that education system into one that is in service of life on the planet. So this means centering learning that addresses the intersections of social well-being and planetary health, which requires centering learning in alternative economic thinking and really developing self and social and ecological awareness alongside the skills to engage in things like radical acts of care, environmental stewardship, compassionate governance. So if you think about in climate speak, a new Green Learning Agenda is really about increasing learners' climate resilience and their adaptive capacity by building sustainability competencies that are really necessary to bring about our social-ecological systems change and all within planetary boundaries.
I've seen some of your work with the Brooklyn Institute that suggests that girls' education can strengthen climate change-related solutions. Can you tell us more about how girls' empowerment is linked to implementation of climate change strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. So we understand from the data and from research that girls and women in low and middle income country contexts experience the negative impacts of climate change in very disproportionate and negative ways. But we also know that investing in girls' education can be a really powerful part of the solution in three particular ways. And so I'll start off with the first one, and that's investing in gender empowering transformative education for both girls and boys, where girls and boys learn about their rights, including their right to bodily autonomy and their right to quality education, and how that can enable girls then to stay in school longer. And when this is coupled with access to voluntary rights-based family planning, the impact of girls' education is to delay premature transitions to adulthood by delaying marriage and delaying the start of childbearing. And we know from research that when girls and women have control over their own reproductive lives, they're better able to raise smaller, healthier, and more sustainable families. Second, investing in girls' education as a climate solution means developing a broad breadth of green skills to be able to take part in green jobs that will fuel the transition to a more sustainable economy. And without these skills, girls and women will remain at the edges of the green economy, just as they have been at the edges of our brown fossil fuel driven economy. And we know that the sectors that will take off first because of increased political interest in them for green transitions are the same sectors that tend to be male dominated, sectors in STEM fields, your science, technology, engineering, and math fields. And then the third way is as a means of ensuring girls have the opportunity to develop and exercise their leadership skills so that they can engage in climate decision-making that'll help them and their families reduce their unique climate risks and their climate vulnerabilities. And they're better able to adapt to the economic and the environmental shocks because they're better able to plan for, cope with, and rebound from climate crises.
Obviously, you've dedicated a lot of time and research to this project. So what is your recommendation on more of what can be done for the global education community to focus on climate action with young people around the world? Have the UN or other global agencies looked at promoting this agenda?
Yes, I mean, the short answer is yes. The UN and other agencies have definitely attempted to address education in the context of the climate crisis, all the way back from the 90s and even before then as well, with education for sustainable development. But I think what we've seen, and a lot of research has demonstrated this, is that a lot of those previous efforts haven't reached their transformative potential. We realize as a global education community and brought more broadly that the most impactful way to education, or the most impactful way to climate action, is through education and through education of more sustainable mindsets, beliefs, attitudes, and worldviews. These sorts of ways of being and seeing in the world help us then unlock the extent of political actions that are needed, as well as the technical solutions that we need to be able to then adopt climate mitigation strategies at scale. And I think, one of the big roadblocks is that the global education community first needs to see itself as a climate stakeholder. And this means at the most basic level to begin integrating gender empowering climate change education inside classrooms and to begin making schoolyards and school buildings more climate resilient and greener. When you're thinking about content and context within the classroom, thinking about building the technical knowledge and the skills that are required for women and men to participate equally in sustainable greener industries. So think, for example, women's participation in climate resilient agriculture or climate smart agriculture. Another way that our new green learning agenda positions forward is really thinking about orienting more generic knowledge, generic skills and attitudes towards more sustainable behaviors. So this is like pivoting critical thinking, problem solving, communication, and so on, towards understanding the root drivers and the multitude of solutions for the climate crisis.
What is your recommendation on what governments can focus on in terms of maybe in the education system or in the culture settings that can promote the agenda, the green learning agenda that you're talking about?
Yes, I mean, the first most basic move that governments in Africa should do is really focus on ensuring that there's opportunities to learn about climate change, learn about climate crisis, develop the language and the knowledge around what these causes are, what the impacts are. The Afrobarometer just recently put out a study, the first study to my knowledge, of climate change education or climate change awareness, within the African context. And those percentages are far lower in comparison to the polls and studies that have been conducted elsewhere. So I think this speaks to the real need to ensure that schools are teaching about climate change. They're teaching about climate justice. They're teaching about climate action, because communities, especially those that are on the front lines of the climate crisis, are experiencing the impacts of climate change today. They see it, they feel it, they understand it, but they don't have the language to talk about it or the language to advocate for solutions, community solutions, system solutions. So I think the number one thing to do, the number one thing that African countries can do today is to ensure that young people are learning about the climate crisis and understanding their role in addressing it.